Hello, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon for those connecting globally. And welcome to Black History Month at Temple University Rome to our second edition. And we have our second event tonight, which is anti-racism work in Italy. My name is Benedicta Giunta. I'm student life coordinator here at Temple Rome, and I've been coordinating the events for Black History Month with the help of my colleagues. And tonight we will start with the words of Angela Davis. So she says, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. So as a university, this is why it's important for us to not shy away from the issues of racism and to take concrete steps in order to create belonging and community for all our students, including all of our Black students and students of African descent. So we have moments starting from orientation and with programming and classes in order to create community and belonging. This quote of Angela Davis does not only apply to the US society, because it's important that we acknowledge that racism it is a global and localized issue, and it goes beyond just about being a good or a bad person. It is a systemic and global issue. For this reason, we acknowledge the presence and the contribution of Black people that have journeyed in Italy, and we connect as a Temple Rome community. Tonight we have members from the associate expert of the group Razzismo, Brutta, Storia, which is a cultural association in Italy founded on the 21st of March 2011. 21st of March marks the International Day Against Racism and Discrimination. Inside the association, we have the group of the associate experts, and the work is to eradicate racism through culture. And these groups include activism, scholars, and artists. Today, for our second event for Black History Month, anti-racism work in Italy, we have the opportunity to have experts Angelica Pesarini and Marie Moïse. Angelica Pesarini, she's professor of sociology at NYU Florence, and there she teaches Black Italia. And Marie, she's an activist, philosophy editor for the Jacobin magazine. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to have them with us. I have the honor to be working with them. I also have the honor to call them friends, and I have the opportunity as well to learn a lot from them about racism, race, and intersectionality in Italy. Welcome, Angelica, and welcome, Marie.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this conversation and discussion on this topic. So shall we start with you sharing a little bit about yourself and how your work started and what you've been doing? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I can go. So first of all, Benedicta, thank you so much for this invitation. You can hear me, right?
Yes,
okay. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here and to have these conversations. In February, I consider there are so many events going on with Black History Month, and so it's really exciting to be part of all of this. It's actually hard to catch up with everything that is happening, so it's really nice. So as you mentioned, I work here in Florence at NYU. I have a PhD in sociology and with an expertise in gender studies. And my research is on race, identity, citizenship, and gender in colonial and post-colonial Italy. So I work precisely on Italian colonialism and Black Italians, so from the colonial time to the post-colonial time. And I'm also interested in the racialization of the political discourse on immigration, so the Black Mediterranean and this kind of fields. And also I'm very interested in the Italian developments of the Black Lives Matter movement. So this is why I'm.
Thank you so much, Angelica. Marie, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Benedita, and thank you everybody for being here. And my name is Moïse, and first of all, today I would like to introduce myself as an activist. That means to me as a person who is committed to a radical change of the structural inequality of the system we live in, we are part of, challenging its very roots in racism, colonialism, sex, and class exploitation. And I was not born an activist, I became an activist, and it was for me progressive understanding of the sufferance I felt and the sufferance I saw a lot of people feeling, which I understood it was not my fault, not my family's fault, not my boyfriend's fault, my friends or teachers or just the politician or institution. It was something bigger than every single person, and it was something relational, I'd say. And I felt I needed to change it, or rather to find the strength to change it. So I was born and grew up in a racial mixed family. My father's family migrated from Haiti to Italy. I grew up confronting with my family's experience with dictatorship and migration, institutional racism in Italy, socioeconomic boundaries, and work linked with migration, with working class backgrounds. And I rapidly developed sensitivity to social injustice. So I decided to study humanities, especially history, sociology, and philosophy, to better understand where structural injustice comes from, to understand what enables us to challenge it. And I am still researching about that. I've been doing my PhD in political philosophy in Padua, concerning exactly how people get to participate, to struggle with an anti-racist, decolonial, and feminist perspective. And lastly, I also started looking for activist fellows, and some of them are here with me tonight. So I'm very happy to be here.
Such a pleasure. Welcome to the fellows as well. That's so good. It's not already the introduction. I'm just already excited for this event tonight. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing about yourself. So the first question that we have that dive us in tonight's conversation is, what is anti-racism culture and what are the practices in Italy? And what's the role of academia in shaping anti-racism work in Italy? I believe this question is for Angelica.
Thank you for starting with a very easy question. This is a very, there is so much to say about it, but I've recently started to think about this, as I was mentioning earlier, observing a bit what were the impacts of, the post-George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement in Italy. Of course, for many of us, BLM was not new. We have been talking and interacting and engaging with that for a few years, but I would say after the 25th of May, it started to become slightly mainstream in Italy. So we will remember, probably we do remember, all the protests and demonstrations that happened at the beginning of June after the death of George Floyd. And so in that period, I actually started to think about it, because having worked on as I mentioned earlier, the racialization of the political discourse and the impacts of that discourse on Italian society. I focused on 2018. That was an incredibly violent year for many of us. We had shootings. We had a shooting in Macerata, where Luca Traini, this far-right extremist, in order to avenge a murder allegedly committed by a Nigerian citizen, took a gun and went out in the city shooting any Black person he met. He shot in 10 different parts of the city. He injured 6 people. He didn't kill anyone, but still was incredibly scary. And a month later, here in Florence, where I am, there was another shooting and another Black man died. This was a Senegalese citizen who had been living in Florence for 20 years and who was crossing a bridge, the Amerigo Vespucci Bridge. And on the other side of the street, there was a man, Roberto Pirrone, who wanted to, who initially had thought to kill himself, and then he changed his mind. So he wanted to be punished, and so he committed a crime, and he decided to shoot someone. He said, obviously, I shot the first person I saw, but CCTV showed us that on that bridge, many people passed by and they were all white. So it's strangely the only dead body is another Black body. And then, unfortunately, in March, we also had the national election. And for the first time in Europe, 2 populist parties were in power. And it happened in Italy. So this was the first time in Europe. All the electoral campaign that brought us to that moment was filled and drenched with vitriolic hatred speech, anti-immigrant, anti-Black, anti-refugee. So it was a very racialized electoral campaign that produced some specific results. And then on the 2nd of June of that year, there was another death that struck me particularly. Was an activist, actually, was a 29-year-old Malian activist. So was a Black man from Mali who was living in Calabria, and he was picking tomatoes for 1 or 2 euros per hour, living in what are called a ghetto, the San Ferdinando ghetto, shanty town. And so he was killed, like the person who shot him was sat in his car. And so he killed him because he saw him in an abandoned industrial terrain taking some pieces of iron. So when it was the beginning of June 2020, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so many people in Italy were going in the streets, you know, crying and being incredibly sad and manifesting all this anger, all these feelings. We just came out of a lockdown. So to see so many people in the streets, for me, was really remarkable. At the same time, you know, I couldn't prevent myself from asking why. Why we had such an immense support and sense of injustice for a Black man that was living on the other side of the ocean, who had no connection with Italy. And, you know, it was not the first time we saw that kind of videos. I think about Eric Garner in 2014. We saw him being strangled live. And I don't recall this. I don't recall all these protests, for example, for Soumaïla Sakho, this activist that I just mentioned about. I don't recall these protests for EDDN, besides Florence, where we had to demonstrate on a national level. It went pretty on a very. It didn't create so many feelings, and so I started to reflect a bit on anti-racism in Italy, and I noticed how, for many people, anti-racism is very performative. And that occasion, the protest of the first weekend of June in memory of George Floyd, did really confirm that, because so many people went in the street. But then I was thinking, what about when on Monday we go back to our normal life? What has changed? And so I realized how in Italy and in Europe, because of a precise approach to race, which is color evasive or colorblind, right? We don't see color, we see people. There is only one race, the human race. If you just mention the word race, people are horrified. So because of this erasure of race and therefore racism, anti-racism is sometimes, as I said, performative, and there is the work, the real work behind it missing. It's very difficult to talk about certain issues, you know, especially in relation with the Black Lives Matter. When you talk about white privilege, for example, many people say this is not us. Don't talk about this. This is just the US. We don't talk. We are not racist. In Italy, we are ignorant, but we are not racist. There is no race, and so there is a constant denial of your position. I find that in Italy, for many white people, is very difficult to position themselves, to admit that they have certain privileges, right, in comparison to other people. There is a sort of reluctance to mention color, even to say black or white. In fact, you know, in Italy, people don't consider themselves Italian because they're white. It's just be born in Italy makes you Italian. So there is a very different idea of race that has a very different story from the US. Of course, Italians were themselves racialized as blacks when they went to the US, for example. So the southern Italy was initially racialized first before the colonial mission. And so race in Italy is a very, very complicated issue. It's really blurred. The boundaries, the color line is quite blurred, but still I think it's quite pervasive. And so because it's so complicated to talk about race, also academically, there is a lot of work to do. We don't have some fields of investigation that maybe in other countries do exist. I remember I was interested when I finished my degree many years ago, I was interested in something called gender studies, but I had no idea what it was. I had to go to the UK to discover gender studies and Black studies. And this for me was an incredible discovery that changed my life in a way, because I couldn't even imagine there were this kind of knowledges that I never heard of. You know, when I was doing anthropology, I was just taught by white men about other dead white men, if I have to be very honest. So when I came across these knowledges that were so situated and so positioned, this really changed my understanding of things. So I noticed, though, now, to be on the positive side, that the Black Lives Matter movement also showed that there is a very young generation in Italy of different colors, different religion, different cultures, different languages, that is very engaged, that is very knowledgeable, that is in touch with the world through the social media. You know, social media can be really catastrophic on certain aspects, but incredibly useful if used in a healthy way. And so there is all this new fresh air bringing new debates. And then when it goes on mainstream level, then we have the problems, because there is still a massive wall pushing back. And we see this also in terms of representation. You know, I still find incredible that when we switch on Italian TV, everyone is white, usually men. It's like if we don't exist. People like us do not exist in terms of representation. But then wherever you go in Italy, even in the smallest village, you see that Italian society is not white, has never been really. And so academically speaking, I think now I saw the development, for example, of new courses, of new master classes, of new Zoom was really useful, and the webinars, the online world gave the possibility to many inaccessible knowledges to be known. Everything is free. So this is really good. However, the problem is still who is there, who is speaking for, what are we talking about? And, you know, it's very difficult to hear that, for example, when I mention in my articles that white people, although they may be racialized and may be discriminated for a number of things, they will never experience what is racism as experienced by a Black person. For me, this seems very logical and natural. I can see this creates a lot of tension. People are telling me, how dare you to say that as a white person, I don't know what racism is. And so, you see, there is a lot of work to do, a lot of vocabulary to be developed. But as I said, I notice a lot of energy, especially from younger generations.
That's great. Thank you so much, Angelica. Great introduction. So to the topic, absolutely. You touched on so many issues that's so important about something that stuck with me is the fact, like, yes, society is no longer as wide. I actually grew up in a small town. We are like 10,000 inhabitants. And right now it's even more diverse, but usually the assumption is like there is no presence of people of color, even including in small towns, but actually small towns now becoming even more diverse, even in Italy. So we'll go to Marie. Marie, she says she's an activist. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you've been doing in Milan with the networks that you're part of? And what's the impact of the COVID-19 virus on the communities that you work with?
Yes, I live in Milan, in a suburban neighborhood of the town, where a lot of people suffer from unemployment, where a lot of women, migrant women, live often alone with their children, and especially those migrant women inhabiting in my neighborhood across the color and gender line are often segregated in the labor market to specific jobs and sector. Those jobs we name in sociology as the dirty, dangerous, and demanding jobs, or the caring, cooking, cleaning sector. So especially the women of my neighborhood community were structurally excluded by welfare and benefits government allocated due to face pandemic because their specific sector were not covered by welfare, the emergency welfare. And that is not the case. That was exactly what government decided to do, that is to exclude migrant women from the government, the institutional support. So we decided to organize a solidarity network, which we named You're Not Alone. And we proposed people and neighbors both to participate to the Solidarity Network, both if they were in need of help or if they were available to help someone else. We organized and we are have been doing that, delivery of grocery, drugs. Then we collected money to pay the grocery for people who had lost jobs or couldn't work and had not enough money to pay for that. Then we organized legal and union support to workers that were fired or to people who hadn't enough money to pay house rent and so on. And we also organized child assistance to distance teaching, attending school from home, which were difficult, especially for the family who where parents were obliged to leave the kids alone at home in order to go to work, or who couldn't speak Italian and were in more in difficulty to help children with homeworks, or who hadn't computers at home to organize distance teaching. And it was, and it still is today, very impacting to see how in times of crisis social gaps extend. And at the same time, it was very impacting to see how in times of crisis solidarity extend as well. And in particular, we met numbers of, as I told, it was a great part of my neighborhood, numbers of migrant women employed as caregiver with old people or in cleaning jobs. And we organized a sort of summer school for their children in order to let mothers to go to work and to share collectively the responsibility of the education and care of those kids. And it was great. I experienced something I will define revolutionary, because we experienced something which was not expected by structural racism and structural sexism and classism. And it was something that we made happen thanks to solidarity. People that were supposed to be indifferent one another, to remain unknown one another, or rather to exploit one another, to insult, harass, aggress one another, choose on the opposite, an alternative kind of relationship based on mutual care, on mutual aid and solidarity. And where while we were experiencing confinement, loneliness, institutional marginalization, abandonment, there we created community from below. And I strongly believe in creating community because it is something personally I learned from the anti-slavery struggle story. Slave owners once forbid to their slaves to create families and communities. Mothers and fathers, when were enslaved, often were separated from their children, and a newborn from a slave mother were not even recognized as a son or a daughter or of someone else. It was just a good of someone else. So slave resistances, I think, can still today have the power to teach us to struggle to create community where community are systematically negated. And I think we can learn a lot from the past struggles, whose victory actually meant conquering the human rights we can exercise today. But we know that we have other rights that have still to be conquered. So I hope also, I hope these experiences can inspire some other struggles too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mary, for what you shared and doing in your area. I think it's so important. And I like the ties that you showed also with that the anti-slavery like struggle. So I think it's so important to see the connection, because oftentimes we want to leave these things behind. We say slavery was so long ago, but we do see the same patterns between societies. So I think it's an absolutely like powerful work that you're doing. It's absolutely amazing. We'll probably talk about it even more because it's just so like it's so important. Of the fact like we often spoke, like people have studied like how the social gaps are amplified, but we haven't spoken enough about like how solidarity as well as amplified. And I think that's a great example that you brought. So go back to Angelica. So like you spoke briefly earlier about race. So the word race, as you said, is not really used in Europe, and mainly the reason being the Holocaust. So why do anti-racist thinkers like yourself believe like yourselves, like you and Marie, like believe in the bringing the term back, especially back in use, especially in Italy?
Yes, as you said, obviously, at the end of World War II, because of the shame of the Holocaust and all the devastation it created, European governments decided to kind of get rid of the word because of that word, so many people died. In Europe, there was this approach to say, let's get rid of this. We know that race doesn't exist. In 1949, actually, there was a UNESCO statement, probably the first one, claiming that in front of the law, we are all equal, regardless of our color or phenotypes, our physical feature. So I was thinking today, I was teaching this today to my students, and we realized how this occurred only 70 years ago, this statement where we said race doesn't exist. And 70 years is really nothing. So it's a very, very recent past that many people would like to forget, but it's not possible. And especially if you erase it, it's even more problematic. Recently, Germany removed the word race from the constitution, although they said, we remove race, but we keep the word racism. Like, I mean, like if one doesn't contain the other. And in France, the same in 2018, the parliament voted to remove race from every legal document and to replace it with gender. In Italy too, the third article of the constitution tells us it's not possible to categorize people according to a number of criteria, including race. As I mentioned, for many people, race has only biological connotations. When you say race, for many people is the race of 1938, the one used in the Manifesto della Razza, where racism became institutionalized. Italians had to be racist. It was written in the Manifesto della Razza. If you think about race, people think about Nazi Germany and what they did, racial hygiene. So we know that race doesn't exist. We know that biologically race doesn't exist. There are no races. The genetic difference is considered 0.002%, something similar, so non-existent. And obviously, we are phenotypically different because we have different biological stories, but we know that genetically we are basically very, very, very similar, almost identical. So if this race doesn't exist, we need to acknowledge, though, that because of a concept called race, a number of people have been exposed to, as Ruth Gilmore say, premature death. A number of people still today are exposed to premature death, are discriminated against because of that concept. People are racialized, so they are classified, treated, considered, discriminated, killed because of that concept. So I'm fine in saying race doesn't exist, but we cannot just get rid of the word because it's like not mentioning a massive elephant in the room. If we don't have that concept, how do we monitor racism? And this is one of the main issues for researchers. I recently wrote a chapter about race in the world, how race is monitored, and in the census specifically. And with my colleague, Guido Tintori, we had to write, in the Italian census, there are no mention of ethnicity or race. You are Italian or you are a foreigner. And here we go to citizenship. So Italian citizenship law is drenched in racial codes. But this is something really denied. As I mentioned, I work on Italian colonialism. And so when Italian invaded and created Eritrea, what is called now Eritrea, in 1890, already in 1909, so 20 years later, the colonial government had to think about citizenship and race, because there were a lot of mixed race children being born in the colonies. And because Italian citizenship was transmitted already by blood, if recognized by their Italian fathers, these kids were Italian. In fact, many became, and this is also, for example, the history of my family, of my grandparents and my great-grandparents. So there was this Italian blood being transmitted. However, there was an interesting fact that when there was a mixed race child with an unknown father, this child could get Italian citizenship if she or he could demonstrate or showed on their body the presence of Italian blood. This was already 1909, so we were already associating blood to Italianness. In 1933, so when the fascist regime was already in power, they used that law to redefine citizenship. And so again, if there was a mixed race child born in the Italian colonies in East Africa, who showed on their body signs of the white race, and I'm quoting, they could get Italian citizenship. So how would you demonstrate these signs of the white race? Well, even in the Italian colonies, we were doing a craniometrical measurement. We were measuring the body. So this is not something that happened only in other colonial contexts. Also in Italy, there was a racial classification based on numbers and measurements. And so this was how citizenship could be obtained if you showed, in case of unknown father, a signs of the white race. Today, we are in 2021. Our citizenship law is still transmitted by blood, jus sanguinis. Obviously, someone will say, but come on, there were historical reasons for that. And for sure, when Italy unified as a country in 1861, a few years later, between 1880 and 1916, out of 30 Italian people living in Italy, 14 million left. So talking about blood was literally a hemorrhage of blood leaving the country. And so that's why also Italian citizenship is transmitted by blood, because blood was the only tie. If Italian identity was a family, what was connecting us all together was this blood. So it doesn't matter where you were born. If you had this blood being transmitted to you, you could be by law Italian. And so this law is still active today and is one of the most generous retroactive citizenship law. So if you can demonstrate that you have an ancestor who had Italian identity, you can apply online. And if it goes smoothly from the other side of the world, you apply online and you can get an Italian, therefore European passport. However, if you were born here by non-Italian parents, so parents who do not have this blood, as you well know, Benedicta, with your activism in Italiani Senza Cittadinanza, you are a foreigner, legally a foreigner. So this just to say how race is embedded in Italian citizenship, in Italian identity, and how is incredibly tied to whiteness. But you see how complicated is all of this if we don't have the language to talk about. Also, as I was mentioning, how do we monitor racism? For example, racist bullying in schools is one of the most occurring. We cannot mention that, we cannot monitor that. Who does have access to certain services and who doesn't? Who is paid more than other people? Why? We are really deprived of tools as researcher and policymaker to monitor racism. So to me, it's very hypocritical to say, let's not talk about race, let's erase race, but then all the rest stay in place.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Angelica. That's important, a very important reflection to do, especially seeing how this reflects. I was thinking back of my thesis for my master's, and I did it on citizenship law. And I remember it's marked that in 1912, we have an Italian citizenship law, and the 1912 law inspires the 1992 law, the most recent citizenship law. And so you say that in 99, so the changing of citizenship law, mainly of mixed race kids, really like connects the dots, and that's very important. So we have few minutes because we have like about, I would say like 5 minutes because we're going to need to be over time, but we want to leave room for questions. So we'll go briefly with Marie on like the importance of counter narratives. So Black History Month is a form of counter narrative. We have this history that oftentimes is told in one way or by the media, is told in a single way, especially between Italian history. There is not a full acknowledgement of the contribution of non-white Italian. So how can we celebrate the colonial stories of resistance as part of Italian history and as part of their anti-racist work?
You know, when I was a child and I went to school, um, as I told you, I am half Haitian, but the story of Haiti on my history books were reduced to a little chapter on the history book, telling just the fact that Haiti was the first destination of the transatlantic slave trade, together with a little picture of a line of enslaved and chained persons. And I remember when I realized my father's origins were in that pictures. I felt humiliated and I couldn't understand why. At the same time, I was taught, because I was actually really taught to be proud of Christopher Columbus, the Italian hero who discovered Americas and so on. So I started crashing in my consciousness. And only when I started doing activism and looking toward the world from another perspective, and I started to research, I discovered a completely different story. Slave resistances, for example, maroons, fugitive slaves, which created veritable self-managed communities, freed communities, communities where among the first where they didn't just lived in a parallel world where slavery didn't exist. On the contrary, they collected all their knowledges, all their skills in order to find common strategies to go back to the plantation and free all the other comrades and slaves and claim the freedom for all. And Haiti, especially, has a great history of slave rebellions. Haiti was the first Black republic where a slave revolution won. And when I discovered all of that, because no one at school taught me, my slave's origins started to be my deepest proud. And I went on and on learning and studying, and I love especially a part of my philosophy studies, which conceives the notion of freedom as marooning. That means that freedom means the practice to leave temporarily the oppressive society in order to build freed communities, other places based on other values, in order to embody another experience and then struggle to generalize it. And I think every Afro-descendant or every person nowadays inheriting colonial history from their family. I think every one of us is a son or a daughter of a survivor. That is an activist, someone who struggled for her or his survival and for the survival of their sons and daughters and their communities. And I'm very happy to celebrate Black History Month in Italy this year with such a lot of initiatives, because I think Black History Month has the potential to rewrite the history of this country, starting from the experiences, the memories, the standpoint of those who survived struggling against racism and colonialism, which a part of this country inherited, is proud of, and I think it can become a common wealth, a really common wealth.
Thank you so much, Marie, for sharing out that intertwined with your family history, what we learn in school, and like those struggles, those internal struggles, but still that they create full identity and belongings, which is, I think, is so important. Maria, I'll go back to you. We really have very few minutes because I want to leave room for questions. You know, so many important points, both you and Angelica. So briefly on like what's like in the US, we saw the influence of Black feminism over academia and to better understand like racism. I mentioned earlier Angela Davis and feminism and intersectionality academically. So yes, can you tell us how activism can produce knowledge?
Yeah, you know, Black feminism once was not considered a research field as it is considered today. What happened is that thousands of Black women started claiming to study, to be protagonists in their universities, and to introduce new theoretical tools in order to give another theoretical interpretation of their own conditions. And this was the basis to a struggle inside the academia in order to build new theoretical tools, which to have another understanding of human condition, capable of go beyond class reductionism or male reductionism. I mean, an interpretation of reality reduced to the experience of someone, some particular social subjects, especially the dominant ones, so male, rich, heterosexual, and so on. And thanks to Black feminism, new theoretical tools reshape social theory, and especially the tendency to consider that there is only one scientific point of view on reality, the science. What Black feminism let us understand is that there is not one science, one eye on the world, but there are different and heterogeneous point of view on the world. And according to our class or sexuality or gender or race conditions, every one of us is exposed to some different forms of exploitation or violation. And this is important when we understand what knowledge is, because our different experiences shape our look toward the world, and because they shape our experience of the word. And intersectionality showed the system of oppressions is not just a single uniform system, but actually the system of oppression we live in is what is dividing one another exactly by confining us in different genders, classes, races, different conditions, compelling us to compete in order to success or to survive. So I think intersectionality gave us some powerful lenses to analyze our standpoint, our point of view, since from where we analyze the word, or our departing point when we try to change the word. And this is very important in order to create alliances which can be conscious of our different condition, our specific relations, the kind of power relations we embody. And it is crucial when we have to build some common strategies to change the world, because it is exactly by being aware of our specific condition that we can understand and find the walls that divide us, separate us, and put us in competition one another. Angela Davis, which is one of the most important theorists of the Black feminism and intersectional theories, synthesized this analysis in a powerful phrase that I love, which is walls turn sideways are bridges. That is intersectionality, I think.
Thank you so much, Marie. So we have a final question. We'll do that in a, and so we can open up. We already have a couple of questions, and I believe more will come up. So, like, what? This is for Angelica. So, how come the knowledge produced by associate experts of Razzismo, Brutta, Storia influence Italian academia and anti-racism practice? And what role, like, study abroad institution like Temple University Rome can play in amplifying the voices of Black Italians and other minorities between Italy?
Yeah, I think I can combine a few questions together, because I was also looking at Kaya's question, which is related, right? What is our advice to Italian educators when covering Black history in order to educate the younger generation? So I think what Marie was mentioning, and that we've mentioned all along, positionality. If you don't know where you're starting from, already is a bad start, and that's a big problem that we have in Italy. Also in schools, I saw sometimes very damaging things being done to children with good intentions, but with devastating impacts. And this is because, in a way, books are written by white Italians for white Italians, in which still we don't see kids with a different background being represented. And when they are, as I said, it's very damaging. I just would like to remember what happened last year. And thanks to the social media, we shared that a lot. Was a textbook for children in first or second elementare, so when they are 6 or 7 and they start conjugate verbs, and in order to learn the conditional tense, there was a Black kid represented with a bunch of white kids, and all the white kids, they were using the tense correctly. I would like to play, to color, to have fun. The Black kid represented there was unable to speak proper Italian. So he was not conjugating the verbs, he was talking in the infinitive form, which was, I don't know, to me it seemed obscene, a colonial text, to be honest, where the Black figure doesn't speak properly the language, is not able to conjugate the grammar and the verbs. So this was just one example of so many. So if you would do a research or survey of Italian textbooks for elementary schools, I think we would be horrified. And already I wanted to highlight how an important research was made already in 1997 by Paola Tabet, who went around Italy, and she collected 7,000 essays by Italian students from elementary schools, asking what you would like if your parents were Black. And the results she got were shocking, terrifying. She said, after that research, we have a problem with racism in Italian schools. But still today, when you go in a classroom, in a school, you don't see non-white teacher. Is extremely rare, right? And the few that are there very often are ostracized by the institution, by the structure, because they have to follow a very rigid curricula that is still drenched in coloniality in a way. Is enough to think how we study Italian colonialism, even at the university level. So imagine what you study in elementary school. So I think, Black history, Black Italian history, it would be a dream if it would be taught in schools. We are still dreaming because we still don't exist. So imagine talking about Black history, right? But Black History Month, as Marie said, has a great potential to spread these new stories. And Black History Month is basically that, is to celebrate the presence and the history and the cultures of Black people in Italy in this case. So, and Razzismo Brutta Storia, with this association, with the organization, we try to produce alternative knowledges, so we try to also create different angles from which you can see everyday life. And so we post a lot about, we spread also a lot of knowledge. We introduce new authors that maybe are not translated in Italian yet. We introduce new concepts, new words. I think about a campaign we did, Le parole che ci mancano. That was a very successful campaign in which each of us actually explained a word. I explained the word racialization, razzializzazione. Marie, I think she explained intersectionality, oppositionality. And so Benny also, Benedicta explained another word. And so those videos were, I was shocked, they were watched by so many people and they were accessible. So I had people message me later say, wow, I know what is racialization now. And that was for me, such a big reward, because this is, for me, this is my form of activism. I have a privilege. I had access to very high level of education. I'm part of the establishment because I work for a university that is private, so that charges thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to their student, that maybe doesn't necessarily give back to their staff and faculty in the same way, but that's another story. But because I'm part of this establishment, I have this power, I think it's my duty to spread this knowledge I may have outside the walls of academia. And so this is what I would advise to, before teaching kids about Black history, I think teachers need to educate themselves about their position if they are white teachers, for example.
Thank you so much. Thank you both to Maria and Angelica. And yeah, thank you, because this was so important, especially the importance of teachers of educating themselves and the role that education plays in influencing our upbringing. So it's absolutely important. It's so related to so many things that shared, like Marie in school, talking about like not being seeing yourself between Italian schools, or seeing yourself like in a narrative that oftentimes is celebrated between your household, that your background is celebrated, and when you go to school, it was demonized. So a very important aspect So, so one question was from Jennifer. She was one of our employees. She was part of the Cultural Identity program. It's a program that we run here to amplify the stories of underrepresented students while studying abroad. And she asked about materials that are available to, so like, yeah, about current initiatives and what you're currently working on what, how can they support from the United States, so I believe online, and if there are any websites, books, and any helpful information that students can receive. So we put some websites in the chat, but I don't know if Marie or Angelica have any additional information that may be available for people globally.
We have a lot of work to do, but I think Razzismo, Brutta, Storia is a good site where to find some sources, and I also would like to remain available for other exchanges even after tonight. If someone wants to go on with the discussion, we can also rest in touch. And I think, well, with actually exactly with Angelica, we were discussing about creating a website where to put all the references about the basic literature to go on with anti-racist studies. I think after tonight we have to we have to do it. We will.
It definitely has to happen. Thank you so much, Marie. If you want as well, just please the chat as Angelica did, so you can take down some notes. We have a question from Joel, and he's asking, when educating people, how can we differentiate between racism and ignorance, which is very common, especially in Italy? Are they at the end the same thing? So we can know how to teach the person, or if it's worth it or not to teach the person. So how do we distinguish between racism and ignorance? Are they the same? And so what can we do? What do we understand when an education is possible and when it's not possible?
We'll say briefly, I think education is always possible and always needed. And this is a very interesting question, Joel, because as Benedicta says, it's so common in Italy to hear this difference between racism and ignorance. In Italy, we are not racist, we are ignorant. And I think it's such a dangerous shortcut that you take, first of all, to erase yourself from the structure, right? Like if you're ignorant, you cannot be racist. But we are all part of the structure. We are all drenched in racism in many different ways. We are all raised with gender and sexual orientation, certain codes, certain gender codes, certain values. We're socialized in a way in which racism, sexism, class exploitation are core parts of our life. So it's very tricky and very dangerous to use racism and ignorance in a sort of interchangeable way, or to deny the racism and to admit the ignorance, because we are all part of this. Our roots all stem from the same structure. And ignorance is also, I think is a very objectable word. What does it mean to be ignorant? Ignorant of what? Because many knowledges are produced that are considered non-scientific or inadequate or lacking, certain scientific codes, but they're very powerful. So what is ignorance? Who does define ignorance for whom? And then obviously, so we can, how to shape, yes. So I think education is always possible, but also education especially in this kind of things, when you want to know about someone else's experience, you have a big responsibility, because it's also very problematic to ask someone to educate you, to tell you what to do. Very often when I do talks, one of the questions I have is, Angelica, how can we fight racism? Like if I had this magic solution. Each of us can fight racism from their own position. And again, we said this many times, but this position, knowing where we are, is the first, is the really important and solid way to create alliances. If we don't know where we are, if we deny who we are, if we deny the responsibility we have in this structure that in which we're all wrapped up, is very difficult to teach. So education, I think, is also an act of responsibility, and an anti-racist act to do your own research.
Thank you so much.
Can I add
Angelica.
something about
Yes,
that?
please go ahead.
Just a few seconds, speaking about ignorance and academia. If racism were just a matter of ignorance, why there is so few racialized people in academia enabled speaking about racism? Actually, when we look at the universities and we look at the whiteness of this institution, I think we can acknowledge it's not just a matter of ignorance, it is a matter of power and of political intention to share that power or not. And when we were confronted with hierarchical structures, the matter of power, it's a matter of exclusion. So I think even if this is the problem we confront with, everyone can, as Angelica said, can have a role in put this structure in question by doing it even in our studies and research. So participating together in producing other knowledges, other point of view about on the structural injustice and strategies to change it.
Yes, thank you so much, Marie, for adding to this. So there is another question. I know we went over time, by the way. I want to acknowledge this, especially for our colleagues from the US. If you're busy between your work day, please feel free to leave as well. And but of course, if Angelica and Marie are available, we will go ahead and answer some very interesting question in the chat. So there is one question which is very interesting from the political point of view. So we have, I believe, is Anna. And yes, Anna, she's asking, as an Afro-Italian, I do in my adult years feel shut out of the political process, often feeling politics can only happen to me. This is further fueled by the lack of little representation in politics. How do we go about empowering our voting bloc, people of Afro descent, immigrant roots, so that we do not feel, so we also feel and exercise our right, I believe, yes, exercise our right to shape the society we are part of. Who wants
This
to
is for
go
Marie.
it?
This is Marie. I feel you should answer to that.
It's difficult to understand, to answer in few seconds. I just think no one can free himself or herself alone. I think we are in a political situation where we really need to collect the strands, the minds, our analysis, in order to, because we need collective strategies and we are still fragmented a lot. So that's why I spoke a lot about solidarity, because I think solidarity is a practice, is not just a value or a moral posture. It is a practice that enable us to build to build relationship where relationship is absent, where we find ourselves divided and fragmented. And I think we have a lot of work to do on on this field of the problem, because we have to be united in order to build and empower all the anti-racist struggles. I don't know, Angelica, what do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think actually I can perhaps answer the last question. Maybe that, yeah, it seems a bit connected to the idea of race. So the question is if the removal of race in legal documents by the government is an intentional ploy to silence and ignore the issues people of color face in Italy, or a honest attempt to create more equal playing field for people of color. Well, intentions are always is always the problem, I think. In a way, I mean, you know, for example, at the end of World War II, I think the idea to remove race is not so unreasonable, because people, literally millions of people die because of race, because of this idea of race. So it was not surprising in a way that the most immediate solution was let's get rid of it. But now that we have been developing as a society, as a multicultural society, now that we know that Europe is not a white continent, that Europe is very mixed, that racialized people experience different racialized people have different experiences of politics, of health, of work, of housing, of education, of political participation. Well, this has been said, is not that people have been silent. I think about Italy, how many fights, how many protests have been made in name of changing the citizenship bill. And then you see from, you can see from having good impacts, at some point you need to make choices, and choices sometimes are inconvenient for political forces. We were all incredibly disappointed by the lack of courage of the so-called left-wing parties that we had, that were not able to push for the change of the law that would really change the life of almost 1 million people. So we can see how the citizenship law and all the fights that have been made, all the people going to squares and protesting, saying, I'm Italian too, although on paper I'm not. This was just used, blatantly used as an electoral tool for political consensus, because once the moment came to apply all these good intentions, you didn't. And so I think, you know, although maybe originally the idea to consider that we're all equal is tempting. It would be nice to say, I don't see color, I see people. It would be really nice. But if you say that, you really erase all the differences, all the problems, all the discrimination that so many people experience, and you consider just your own experience. You have the privilege to say, I don't see color, because color is not part of your experience. You may be discriminated for a number of things, but color is not one of those. And so to say, I don't see color, although the intention can be the most wonderful one, is still an act of violence. And so there is need to reconsider the weight of politics, of political actions and legal documents, we need to change the vocabulary, because it's an old vocabulary, it's an old language. It doesn't reflect anymore what society is now.
Thank you so much, Angelica, also for acknowledging the struggles, especially for citizenship law. So we have one last question. This will be the very last one, because I'm sure like we now like 9:20 over here. So expanding on the discussion of anti-racism, this is from Chinere, in academia, do you think it's also equally important to discuss and acknowledge racial exclusion in other industries, such as the beauty industry, makeup and hair products in Italy? If yes, do you think these issues add to the internalized racism and structural discrimination in Italian society? Who wants to go for it? It is an interesting question, but yeah.
Me, Marie. Okay. Okay. Yes. So acknowledging racial exclusion in other industries. This is something I'm working on, actually, at the moment, because I am collaborating with the fashion industry. And after Black Lives Matter, there was a fashion stylist, Stella Jean, that decided to go vocal about the racism in the Italian fashion industry. We have seen how some huge brands, global brands made in Italy, produced incredible racist artifacts and accessories for fashion. So definitely, and makeup and hair products. Now we are seeing actually finally a little change. We can find our own shades. We can find our own skin tone in terms of tights, for example, which is, wow, incredible. I found the right color of concealer. That was always a massive issue. So this is obviously, for some people, that's the norm, but for us is a big kind of victory. But yes, I think we need to acknowledge this. And if yes, do you think this issue adds to internalized racism and structural discrimination in Italian society? Well, definitely, because the needs of racialized people sometimes are not even considered as human rights, as real needs. When people complain about racism in a certain industry, there is always a sort of denial, or almost complain why you see racism everywhere. Why do you think this is racist? It's not, I'm telling you. So we're always kind of taught what is racist and what is not racist. We're always told we do exaggerate. We see racism everywhere. And so I noticed the more rights we ask for, and the more the structure shakes, right? Because it's not made for that. The structure is made to stay very solid, very rigid, and very segregated and compartmentalized. And so having voices speaking up shakes this structure. Asking for rights, I notice how with the Black Lives Matter, many more people of color felt empowered to talk, and many more white people became more and more resistant. It was kind of a clash. The more people were finally saying, this is racist, this shouldn't be done, the more certain people said, you are censoring us. This is cancel culture. This was another big word, cancel culture. So I think, yes, it creates tension, it creates frictions, but I think it's part of the normal course of things.
Okay, I will add just a little answer concerning this question. It's
I was that
maybe...
one too, but go ahead, Marie.
Okay, maybe it's more philosophical, so a nonsense answer, but my counter question is what beauty is, because when I analyze what is the history of this notion, I find the roots of this notion in the colonial and racial history, where beauty standards were created by defining beauty equal whiteness and blackness equal ugliness. And historically, actually, a part of the anti-racist movement claim that Black is beautiful. I mentioned Angela Davis before. She was one of the Black beauty standards iconography, with claiming about the beauty of the Afro hair, for example. And this brings this inspired in me another question, which is, do we need beauty, or do we rather need love? Because I don't actually, if I look inside myself, I'm not looking for me to be to conceive myself as beauty. I want to get to love myself. And I think beauty standards daily negate this relation of self-love to ourselves. And I think we have collectively worked to this level of the problem, actually. And with Angelica also, and Benethink and other comrades from Razzismo, Brutta, Storia, we created a docu film which is called I Love My Hair, in order to question the beauty standards we embody in our eyes when we look at our afro or curly hair. And we try to work exactly on this, on our relation to our bodies based on love and not in beauty.
Thank you so much, Marie. I'm actually not going to add to it because I think you said it beautifully. So I just gotta shut it down. So they're asking about the documentary. Remind me again. I remember we participated. Is it out?
Yeah, I think we did the final editing. So we are dividing into chapters, into single stories, but there will be also the final version. It's all coming out in February, so we were really waiting for Black History Month. So I would say, Daniela, if you wanna monitor the website, Razzismo, Brutta, Storia, you will definitely see when it's out, and you can maybe already read a bit about the work in progress and with the translation in Italian of the book I Love My Hair, that is now available in all the Feltrinelli bookshops, sorry.
Yeah, we did this project connected to the launch of the book, and it's a very important book. It's very simple, but encourages children, especially the children with career, to embrace their cause and create and understand it. So it's a book that I actually shared with one of my nephews, and that creates questions and understanding of oh, why is it that way? So it creates question, understanding, appreciation, and as Mary said self-love, the much needed love for ourselves that oftentimes society does not give us through beauty standard. And with that, I want to thank everybody that's participated on this call. I want to thank Angelica and Marie for being with us tonight. And definitely we know that there is a lot of work to do, but we know that we're definitely on the right path. So thank you so much for everybody that attended. And
thank you to this audience that was really receptive. Thank you so much for all your questions.
Yes.
I could feel the energy somehow. So thank you so much for staying so long and asking all these questions. Both me and Marie have left our emails, so if you want to carry on the conversation, let us know. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening or day for this connected. Thank you so much.
Bye.